What is the most memorable moment you shared with a stranger who you never saw again? Few years back my wife and I visited Italica, a Roman ruined city a few miles from Seville. The ruins are glorious and we had them to ourselves, so as we emerged from the gladiator gate and the amphitheater I stalked out into the sunlight, threw out my arms and roared, "Are you not entertained?" It rang off the old seats in a satisfying manner. Turns out we weren't alone. I spun to find a Japanese tourist staring at me in wonder, who then grinned nervously, snapped a picture, and gave me a thumbs up. My wife, "You're an idiot." Well, I actually did see this person again, but I think you'll like it. When I was 11, 2002, I was diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia, a very rare form that's hard to treat. Went through the treatments and bone marrow transplant really well though and got better, etc. When I was 14 I was picked to go to a ranch in Colorado for kids that had health issues like myself. Anyways, on one of the connecting flights I sat next to an older woman and she noticed a car magazine that I had. We started talking and I told her I liked Mustangs and turns out she had 282 GTs, had won awards with them, etc. It was really cool to talk to her and when we landed we went our separate ways. Fast forward 2-3 years, can't remember exactly, and my dad and I drove to Arkansas to pick up a Mint 82 GT. We get there and start talking to her and she starts saying the other cars she has and it finally clicked in my head. She was the lady on the plane. When I mentioned that to her she remembered me and it was just pretty amazing that in a population of over 300 we found each other again. Just my mildly interesting story. I was a horticulture student on a botanical tour of Europe in 1979. I am at a flower market in Munich and see a plant I don't recognize. The lady working it doesn't speak English. I don't know any German. I see a plant I do know, touch the leaf and say the Latin name for it. She nods and smiles. I name another plant I know. Her smile gets bigger. I point at the unknown plant and look at her with an expression that I hope says, "Your turn." She tells me the Latin name. We don't speak each other's language but we can communicate in a language that has been dead for over 1,000 years. Cool. My friends and I have a similar story. We were in France and I was super sick. Our med student friend couldn't find the medication she wanted me to take. We couldn't speak French and the pharmacist didn't speak English. Eventually they communicated only through active ingredient names, and I got the right meds. Years ago, I was at the bus stop super early one morning. It was really cold as well. Anyway, there was a guy that I used to see every time I would get the 7 AM bus. Looked like a builder. He always got off near one of the large building sites by the university. We were on nodding terms. One morning, there was a fireball disintegrating meteor. We both saw it. He turned to me and said with a super serious face, "You know our souls are forever linked now." We went back to nodding terms, and I never saw him after I quit early morning classes. I guess because I remember it. He was kinda right and sucker is still trolling me. In the afterlife he is going to greet you and say hello soul brother. My son was in a pretty serious accident. I was a wreck in the IQ waiting room. A little girl maybe about 9 or 10 years old was with her family, saying goodbye to her great grandmother. She waltzed right up to me and said, "Sir, why are you crying?" Double quote. I explained my son was very sick. She handed me a miniature puppy doll and told me it was lucky and my son would get better. She was right. He did and I still keep that little puppy on my dresser and think of that sweet child. Her own family probably gave her the doll saying it was lucky and she was kind enough to pass it on to you. I've shared this on Reddit before. The day I found out my grandmother had a stroke and would never walk or talk again. I was away at college. I finally broke down in a bathroom. A girl came in and asked if I needed a hug. I was crying so hard that I really didn't get a look at her face. I cried on her shoulder for about 10 minutes and then had to pull myself together and leave for class. I never explained myself and she never asked. I never recognized or spoke to her again. I wonder if she sometimes saw me on campus and wondered what was up and if I was okay. Don't know if it counts if I saw him the next day, but I haven't seen him since. I was bartending at a place with outside tables, taking a half break smoking a cig with some regulars when they pointed out this wastoid. He's stumbling, hacking, dry heaving, and spitting down the block. He leans on a couple of poles for a couple of different moments. He gets to his truck, which is parked right in front of us, and is struggling to get into it. I go over to talk him out of driving and he explains he's not drunk, in the same fashion that all drinks do. As a responsible bartender, I urge him again not to drive and he says something's not right, man. I really don't feel well. So I say, I believe you, but maybe you should go to the hospital. He tells me he is, but he can't afford the ambulance. I convince him he can't afford a car accident then either, and it will only take a moment for me to hail him a cab. Oh, this is before Uber. He concedes, and in under a minute, I grab him a cab and tell the cabbie to take him to Mercy Hospital, the closest in the area. At this point, he's doing much worse, so I hand the cabbie $20 and tell him to rush. The next day the guy comes back for his car and to thank me. He was having some sort of respiratory attack and would have surely died without medical treatment. He tried to pay me the $20 back, and at that point his tears of me really choking up, and I refused his money, telling him to pay it to the hospital $5 at a time. That will keep the hospital off your back for at least 4 months. After a million thank yous and I owe you my life. He drives away, never to be seen again. TLDR. Don't assume crap about anyone, and be nice to each other. It might save a life. DC last May for the Gaslight Anthems 59 Sound Reunion Tour. In the back of the mosh pit there were a few of us that would bob in and out depending on the songs. There was a guy in a blue raglan shirt who I was standing close to for almost the whole show, and I sort of felt like he might have been keeping an eye on a few of us back there. During the song The Backseat we both jumped into the pit, and at the crescendo of the music we grabbed hands and jumped around together for a little bit. Don't know his name or story, but we had that pure connection over the music and it was great. I had just found out my husband of 10 years had cheated on me. I was driving and crying so hard that I quickly pulled over at the nearest parking lot. I parked my car and walked over to the beach, and while watching the waves fell to my knees and just sobbed. Gut-wrenching sobbing. About 10 minutes later, a stranger walked over to me, held her hand out and helped me get up. She then led me to a bench and sat me down. She hugged me and rubbed my back. She let me cry and would say to me, "This too shall pass." After about 15 minutes, I composed myself as much as possible, and she smiled, got up and continued on her walk. I truly believe she was my guardian angel. I think about that moment all the time. When an older gentleman knocked on my door one day and asked if he could possibly come inside and revisit the home in which he had lived over 55 years ago. It was a pleasure to show him around and to hear his recollection of things that had happened within those walls many years ago, some of which were eye-openers. I never saw him again because he was visiting from the other coast, where he now lives. Still, he told me tales of the house and neighborhood I won't forget. Hey, I recently did this. I lived in Northern Ireland till 1975 when we emigrated to Australia. My mum and dad built a house and I basically grew up there. This April I took my dad back to WWII and visited the village. We went to the house and were shown around by the lovely couple that now own it. It seems so small, but then that was 43 years ago. I was on a long late night bus ride. It was express, so it made very few stops. The bus had maybe 10 people on it in total. Halfway through the trip it made a stop at a small town station so people could grab a snack or use a public restroom and maybe stretch their legs. I went up to the counter to buy what at that point was my dinner, even though it was after 10 p.m, and when the cashier rang it up I passed a $50 bill to her and she told me that she couldn't make change. Defeated, I went back to my seat on the bus. As everyone piled on and the bus drove away, a lovely middle-aged lady walked up from her seat near the back and politely asked if I minded if she sat with me. I told her she was more than welcome. She sits and proceeds to unpack a small lunch bag. She then split the entirety of her meal with me. She said she had been waiting for the washroom to clear out and had overheard what happened. She said, "I've gone hungry in my life and it sucks. I wouldn't wish it on anyone, so you can share with me." When we were done I jokingly asked if she could break a $50 and we had a good laugh. She stuck with me for the remainder of the trip and was a very interesting lady besides being incredibly generous. I hope she is well. This is so simple and yet so kind. It's a nice reminder that even the smallest acts of kindness can have a big impact on someone. When I was 14, I was trapped in the rubble of an earthquake. I spent 6 hours crawling towards a man whose face I never had the opportunity to see. He was a citizen who didn't leave his name with anyone and never came forward. After the fact, It has always bothered me that I will likely never find out who he was or tell him how much comfort his voice gave me during those horrible hours. When I saw pictures of the space I ended up in, much later, I couldn't, and can't, understand how he was able to stand where he stood for 6 hours without injuring himself or suffering some sort of emotional trauma himself. He's my hero. I'm a type 1 diabetic. I was on a cruise ship with my family, and sometimes I would be stopped on my way out of the ship because of my insulin pump. It can't go through an X-ray scanner. I was stopped at one point with this other guy, who jokingly asked me, "What are you in for?" I said, "Insulin pump." He said no way and took out his pump. We laughed and shared diagnosis stories. The next day, he came up to me in the buffet, thanking God he found me. His pump wasn't waterproof and he jumped into a pool and forgot to bring insulin vials that could fit into a manual pen. I was able to give him insulin and we got some coffee together. Never traded contact info and never saw him again. He was a cool dude. I had about a 2-hour drive from Columbus to the Cleveland area. I tend to drive on the faster side and therefore pass a lot of people. I noticed about 20 minutes into the drive that the car behind me was still the same one that got onto the highway right behind me. We ended up driving the entire 2 hours right next to each other or in front of behind each other. We created space in lanes to help the other pass the slower cars and made sure the other wouldn't fall behind. As I was getting off the highway, he honked his horn, gave me a big smile, and waved. It has been my favorite driving experience so far. I've had fellow travelers keep me company for hours as well. When they exit, it's like losing a friend. I'd locked myself out of my flat once when I was taking out the rubbish. It would have been close to midnight. Female, early 20s, and just out of hospital. I had no way to get in and no money, phone, or nearby friends. I don't remember this boy arriving or explaining myself to him, but he sat with me until morning the whole night long beneath my block. He had limited English so we barely spoke, and he shared a tin of pineapple with me he had in his bag. He was calm, empty of ill intent, quiet but watchful, friendly, a big, open smile. When the sun came up, he walked on. I'll never forget him, or how kind he was to do that. Some people are so in tune with the world, they protect it. I hope he was okay too. Some people are so in tune with the world, they protect it. This was so profound it touched me. I love it. Only a short sentence but my imagination is filling in so much about this guy just from those few words. As though he has superpowers. He probably does. Thank you for this moment, and thank you to this boy for being there for you. Was on the bus home and this girl sitting next to me was making paper cranes. Before I got off the bus she stopped me and gave me the crane she was working on and smiled at me. I still have it and I think about it a lot. On a night out, I was feeling pretty rough so I was sat down on some steps eating a box of hot chips. This group of girls walked past. One of them in a yellow with black polka dot dress and a flower halo broke off and sat next to me. She had a thick Irish accent. "What's your name?" "Jolly. You?" "Annette." "Ask me where I live." "Alright, where do you live?" She grabbed one of my chips, put it in her mouth and said in the freaking moment, kissed my forehead and ran off to join her group again. Still think about her. It's like the start of a John Green novel. I wrestled in high school and after a match tradition dictates that you walk over and shake the hand of your opponent's coach, then cross the mat diagonally and shake your own coach hand, crossing paths with your former opponent as you do so. Once after a match with a kid I'd never met before I said "round the world" as we approached each other and we high-fived as we crossed paths and then did the round the world high-five thing and high-fived down low behind our backs. It was one of my proudest moments. With my luck, I'd either missed and slapped his butt. I was at this event in a nearby provincial park that offered a shuttle service in and out of the park. They got more interest than bargained for I guess and people ended up having to wait about 2 hours for a ride out of the park. This made some people very angry at these poor rangers who were obviously just kids in their summer jobs. This big dude was just screaming at this young looking girl, just going at her about doing something productive. Poor girl was in tears just apologizing over and over again and trying to get to her co-workers but he wasn't letting her pass. This pee me the frick off, so I yelled, what the frick is she supposed to do? And this older lady a few people down joined in with me to pretty much shame the dude back to his family. Of course, when the buses finally came, he sat his fat butt down on one of the priority seats despite there being a woman with a walker almost falling down right beside him. Old lady from before swoops in and manages to kick him off and sat the woman down. Bad bus lady, I miss you. I was on an eastbound train from Colorado 2 days before Christmas. There was some kind of incident in another car around 11 o'clock that night. A dude got wasted and started threatening other passengers, and we had to make a stop so that the local police could come and collect him. After the delay, the conductor came over the speakers and announced that if anyone was feeling upset or shaken by the incident, one of the passengers had offered to play his guitar in the snack car, and anyone who was awake was welcome to come down and join in for a sing-along. I'm always down for weird train activities, so I decided to grab my harmonica from my bag and head down. There were about 15 of us in the car, ranging in age from 16 to mid-70s and from all over the country. We sang every song we could think of that even kind of referenced a train. We were somewhere in rural Nebraska at that point and nobody had cell service to look up lyrics. So at times I was pretty sure that we were making up more of the words than we actually remembered. The conductor came through after a while and offered to play a few songs, so the guy with the guitar handed it off and pulled out a mandolin, and my harmonica got passed around the group while one guy drummed along on his backpack. After a while the conductor got up and left, then came back with a copy of the Polar Express. He read it out loud to our absolutely captivated group of mostly adult travelers while the snow flew all around us in the night, and I swear that for a few minutes our trip felt every bit as magical as the visits to Santa Claus in the story. Sometime well after the snack car was supposed to have been vacated for the night, we capped things off with the most ridiculously earnest rendition of Don't Stop Believing that has ever been performed and went our separate ways. I never saw anyone from our little makeshift band again, but I'll always remember that weird, wonderful late night celebration of Journey and the magic of winter travel that came about because some guy was a jackass on a train. That reminds of the video of a guy playing sax on the tube, and another guy with a sax starts playing and they jauntily walk towards each other playing sax and improvising. It was super cool to watch. This was last year. It was my 21st birthday and I went to Mosh for my free birthday burrito. As I was walking out I slipped on one of the mats. They had just mopped and put the mats back down before the floor dried, and I busted my butt. I was so embarrassed and in so much pain, but a few people helped me up. One middle-aged woman helped me into the booth she was sitting in and took charge of the situation. She had them remake my food and bring it to the table as well as a first aid kit and a manager. She bandaged up my hand and knee and elbow all while getting the manager's information in case I needed them to pay for doctor's bills, and got me like $100 in Mosh coupons. When my food finally came out she made me sit with her and eat. We ended up talking for like an hour. She told me about her and her family, and she said if it was her daughter in my situation she'd want someone to step in and take care of her. When we were finished she helped me hobble to my car and gave me a huge hug and told me happy birthday. I was so beyond thankful for her and her small act of kindness towards me. My touch football team was sponsored by a local bar that does karaoke on the same day of the week that our games are. We went for a beer after our game. I don't sing well, but I enjoy singing and I'm not shy. I sing the occasional song, but I would say one every 4 times we go. Wasn't planning on singing this time, but a girl went upstage and asked if anyone would sing that song from Grease or the one that I want. I thought, why the heck not? Went up and we freaking nailed it. People were dancing and cheering. We finished the song. We both sort of said good job like stuff. She went back to her table of friends. I went back to my football team. She and her friends left shortly afterward. That was over 20 years ago. I still think about that night from time to time. Bro, that was the start of your high school musical. You missed the rest of the movie. The day my dad died I was holding it together pretty well. Late that night I went to Target to have a moment to just zone out and buy a few groceries. As I got to the check stand with my arm full of stuff I dropped a container of sour cream and it exploded everywhere. I completely lost control of myself and started to cry. The ugly cry. I was instantly surrounded by a group of women who just took charge of the whole situation. They helped me get everything paid for, cleaned up, and one lady even got a new sour cream. No words were spoken, but their compassion and take charge attitude has stayed with me since. A flock of moms following their instincts. Back in the late 90s we drove a dark blue 84 Volvo wagon. Hardly ever saw another car like it. One day at a grocery store we see another couple in the exact same car. I rolled down the window and raised my fist in the air. The other driver saw and raised his fist. Solidarity. It was the night before Christmas Eve, about 8:30 p.m. My mom was trying to sell our place. We'd moved a few blocks away in with my new stepdad. The driveway needed to be clear and there was about 1.5 feet of snow to shovel. I was still pretty young and it was going to be a big job. I trudged over there with my shovel and just started the first row when a random guy in a snowplow turned in and cleared the whole driveway in 2 minutes easy. He was wearing the red plaid jacket and toque combo. Classic Canadian look. I was worried as we hadn't hired a snow removal guy, but he just waved and said Merry Christmas and drove off. Thanks Snowplow guy, you taught me a thing or two about Christmas spirit. Got on the Metro North headed out of NYC to visit family for Thanksgiving. A woman in her 70s got on the same stop as me and sat directly across from me. She had a newborn strapped to her chest and was singing in Spanish. After riding the train for about 20 minutes she signals for my attention and I take my headphones out. I being towards her and she gestures to the baby and says you take. So I held her infant. Grandchild I presume, while she got herself organized to feed and change the baby. After she was done she gestured for me to help her strap the baby back on. She waved goodbye when she got off the train and that was that. It's weird to know there is some random newborn that I've held and will never know. I'm pretty sure I told this before, but I enjoy it, so here it goes. I was playing on my Nintendo DS in the subway when I caught a random connection. I looked up to see if I could spot the other person with a DS, and wound up locking eyes with this incredibly intense little boy who was seated a few benches away from me. Do you have Pokemon? He asked, and as it turned out, I did in fact have Pokemon. With that, our fate was sealed. There's this thing in the Pokemon games where, if you meet the gaze of another trainer on your journey, then you must do battle. I had just experienced this in real life. He destroyed me, all level 100s. Felt like I was an extra in the dang anime doing battle with the protagonist. So about 11 years ago I visited India. I went to a Sikh temple and sat down to enjoy langar, free food served by Sikhs to anyone who walks in. I was served food by this volunteer and we started chatting after lunch and became buddies. So fast forward I am visiting another Sikh temple in the Himalayas and in the kitchen there was only one volunteer when a large bus filled with people pulled in. I went up to the guy and asked if he needed help and he gladly accepted it. So I start serving food to people sitting in the lines and guess who I see sitting down? My buddy from the first Sikh temple. It was great seeing him and we said our hellos. You actually got to pay it forward and to the original person. How cool. Started talking to a guy in a hotel breakfast room. Turned out we were both going on the High Sirius Trail and we were taking the same bus. We get to Lodgepole and part ways as he was heading out a day later. A few days later we run into each other again on the trail and we take a water break and talk about the trail while looking across the Great Western Divide. Coolest guy I ever met backpacking. I have been waiting for a question like this. This was about 2 years ago, when I was in university. I was having some gas pains, so I went to use the bathroom. I was the only one in there, but someone came in shortly after, so I decided to wait until she was done. She apparently was in the same situation as me, so we were both just sitting in silence waiting for the other to leave, occasionally letting out tiny toots. Finally, she says, "Can we both just fart?" I laugh and say yes please, and for about a minute after, both of us are simultaneously laughing and farting. Laughing because we're farting, and farting because we're laughing. We finished at about the same time and said hello as we washed our hands. I never saw her again. I still giggle every time I think of it. I've had a similar thing with a guy in a different stall, except no one spoke. We traded farts that kept getting louder and more obscene. It was like a competition to see who could do the sickest fart. I like to think I won. Back when I rode the bus everywhere, I was at the bus stop outside the mall and this guy comes up and goes, Will you hold my puppy while I run inside and find my wife?" And he produced this little white puppy. So I held it while he went inside. Puppy was so soft. Guy came back with his wife. Took the puppy. I got on the bus and that was that. A few years ago I sat next to this younger girl, maybe 18, on a 5-hour flight. I'm a big dude so I already feel uncomfortable on flights. Try to keep in my personal space, knees closed, etc. I guess she could tell I was uncomfortable because she immediately kinda laughed and said, "Our knees can touch, it's okay, I won't bite you." For the next 5 hours we sat there and talked, shared music, magazines, even split some food, just like we had known each other for years. No weird sexual tension, no awkward moments, just genuinely got to have a good time with a complete stranger in an otherwise uncomfortable situation. When we got off the plane, we high-fived and went our separate ways. Also put me in a great mood for the rest of the day, kind of restored my faith in humanity. One time my girlfriend and I were driving around listening to music. She was in a weird mood, so we get to a stoplight and I crank the music up and start dancing in the car like an idiot, waving my hands above my head and whatnot. The guy across the intersection from us sees me and points me out to his girlfriend and they start laughing. And then my girlfriend does the whole "stop, you're embarrassing me" deal. So, I continue dancing with one hand and look directly at the dude in the other car and point at him. He then proceeds to start dancing like an idiot as well. And his girlfriend gets embarrassed and slaps his chest, presumably saying the same crap my girlfriend was. Everyone in both cars had a good laugh over it. In 2014, it snowed 2 inches in central North Carolina during business hours. To this day, we call the commute home Snowpocalypse, NC, and its drivers are just unprepared to deal with this sort of thing. My normal 10-minute commute turned into a 2-hour ordeal of gridlock across surface streets. I waited patiently for the lights to turn at the corner of Markham and Broad. I was second in line to go. Behind me, the cars stretched as far as the eye could see, but finally I was just blocks away from home. Almost there, the light turned green, and the car in front of me started to move, but began fishtailing in the newly fallen snow. The guy behind me got out of his car, knocked on my window. "Is she stuck?" he said. I nodded. In an unspoken moment of agreement, I got out too and together we walked over to the stuck vehicle, still fishtailing, and began pushing from behind. We too slipped and slid in the snow, but the extra traction was enough that the car was able to make a right turn. I and my newfound friend walked back to our cars, and just as started to move forward, red light, the intersection gridlocked again and it took me another half hour to drive the several blocks home. There was some sense of camaraderie in the common experience of being stuck in traffic due to a light snowfall, but that's North Carolina for you. Flag of Canada approves this message. When I first moved to a small town in Florida, I quickly realized how sparse jobs were. I was desperate and turned to Craigslist. I found a secretary position that seemed too good to be true. The owner of the company quickly replied and said we'd do the interview in a public restaurant. Usually I'm not so naive, but off I went. It was terribly uncomfortable. He wasn't just looking for a secretary, but wanted to pay me to be his mistress or partner, whatever you want to call it. He said I must stay in his condo with him, and if I didn't like it I could pick out another place for us to live, then began to ask more derogatory questions. I told him that this would not work out for me, that I moved to help care for my ill father, and that I was looking strictly for a normal job. I excused myself to the restroom, where an older gentleman stopped me and told me he had heard everything said. He told me I needed to get out of there and that there was something seriously off with this man. So after I use the restroom I go back to the table to firmly decline the offer and thank him for the opportunity when he got seriously angry, saying we could be such a great team, that I'm missing out on a wonderful life with him, all while he's getting louder and more in my face. When the sweet gentleman came over pretending to be my grandfather and asked why I didn't let him know I was in the area that evening. He said he noticed we were through with dinner and asked if I would sit with him for a bit to catch up, and I gratefully took his offer. He told me a little about his retirement, wife, children and grandchildren. Also pointed out the man that interviewed me was standing outside watching through the window. When we realized he wasn't going to leave he walked me to my car. and watched me safely go. I am forever thankful for him because honestly who knows what could have happened. I'm also a lot better with my decision making when it comes to meeting strangers, whether it's in public or not. Several years ago, I was at a street concert, just sitting on a bench, enjoying the music. All of a sudden, some random dude tripped over his shoelaces, did an epic flailing stumble, and landed perfectly seated in my lap. He was slightly drunk, and we had a nice chat for a few minutes while he retied his shoes and then went on his way. It was kinda sweet and I smiled remembering it as I typed this. Same first name, same birthday, same interests and same work field. Saw them at a network creation event and never seen again. That seems like a momentary success, but long-term failure on the part of the network creation event. I was leaving the gym and walked down a long hallway and didn't remember having any money on me. As soon as I stepped outside, I heard a coin drop and looked down and $2 seemed to have fallen from somewhere on me. It was strange because I didn't have any money on me and it would have fallen off of me inside while walking. I thought, it rolls and I pick it up. I was confused because I don't know where the $2 came from. I look up and there's a homeless man in a wheelchair playing harmonica who I otherwise would have passed by. I gave the $2 to him. He said thank you. I said no problem. I began to walk away and he said good. And you? I played along and said, oh, good. Where did you learn to play harmonica? He proceeded to tell me that he used to play all sorts of instruments until he had his stroke, and showed me that one of his arms didn't work anymore. He was a nice guy, and it made my day a bit better. It was a nice and humbling moment. I used to work at Walmart and this lady with her 4 kids are going through self-checkout and have bread, some cold cuts, chips, a case of water, so they don't have enough money. They call me over to cancel their order, so instead of cancelling it I pulled my debit card out and paid the rest. The kids ranging from 6 to 16 are looking at me in shock. The mother is crying and thanking me and I said it's okay, sometimes we just need a little help. A few hours later the oldest son comes back and thanks me again and tells me that they had just gotten robbed earlier that week and were struggling until next payday, and my gesture helped remind her that there are still good PPL in this world. I was out at a beach with my family for a bonfire. Only problem was that we got there too late and there were no more open pits. We sat about on the sand for about an hour until a man came up to us telling us that he had ran out of logs. Seeing as we had no pit and that they were freezing without a fire, we took him up on his offer and joined his family around their pit. We sat until midnight talking about music from the 70s and talking about our lives. Coolest bunch of people I've met in a while. I was in an ice cream store with a few friends, and I made eye contact with some random guy walking to the counter. For some reason, neither of us broke eye contact, and for those few seconds he made an incredibly goofy face, to which I responded with another goofy face. For the rest of the time we were in there, him and I didn't even look at each other again. Edit. After the interaction, we didn't look at each other and make eye contact again. I did look at him a few times while he was waiting and his back was turned and it's possible he looked at me. I should have phrased that better. I crashed a wedding when I was 18 because it was on my bucket list and ended up dancing with a woman who was maybe 24/25. Her name was Natalie. We danced for a couple songs, then the DJ put on a slow song. And I was thinking in my head that's my cue to leave, but I have this habit of when I think I shouldn't do something because of negative thought, I just say frick it and do it. So I grabbed her hand and we slow danced. I didn't know anything about this woman beyond her name, and here I was slow dancing. After that I bounced because people were starting to look at me funny suspiciously, so I left without saying goodbye. Honestly, I look back and think I wonder what Natalie is doing. This was in October of 2013 and honestly that was the first time I said frick it and did what my heart wanted instead of my head. Life has been better ever since. When I was 16 I had to go to the hospital. I don't remember how it happened, but I started talking to a guy in a wheelchair. His name was Harvey. He looked a bit like Jerry Lewis, was in his 40s and told me he has brain cancer and only a few months to live. We talked for about an hour and at the end he gave me some advice. He said don't whine about anything. Whining gets you nowhere. Either do something about it, and if you can't, try to accept it. I never forgot that. That was almost 30 years ago. Harvey, sometimes I whine but I try to keep it short. Thanks for that nice conversation. I was at a play barn and shot a foam tennis ball out of a compressed air cannon directly into the barrel of the cannon on the opposite side, about 60 feet away. The kid operating the cannon was amazed and shot the ball directly back at me, hitting me in the head. We both looked at each other like WTF. Air docking. As a teenager, I caught a bus into town. An old chap took the one free seat next to me and somehow we started chatting. He started telling me how he took part in a battle during World War II where he was one of only a handful of survivors. It was fascinating listening to him, especially being an army brat myself. I wish I could have spent longer on the bus with him and remembered more of the conversation, but it's lived with me now for 35 years. Little did he know while in the middle of the dirt and smoke and noise and death all around that one day he'd be sitting in safety on a bus telling you about it. I was in Darlington, England the day the ash cloud hit the UK. I was supposed to be flying back to Northern Ireland. Instead I decided to get the train to Scotland and then the ferry across. I missed a connection in Kilmarnock with another traveller. She was the owner of a chain of shops here. We had dinner together in a random pub and caught the next train to the ferry port. Never spoke again. You have been visited by the Doggo Beer Master. Comment delicious so you always have beer in your life. Thanks for watching. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day you magnificent people.